The sun hung low over the Arizona plains, bleeding its golden light across the endless stretch of red sand and broken rock as a lonely rider pushed his tired horse through the dust. Eli Turner, a poor rancher whose life had been beaten down by drought, debt, and bad luck, wasn't out here for cattle or fortune. He was chasing a sound. A cry, faint and human, had echoed through the canyon moments ago. And, though it might have been a trick of the wind, something deep in his bones told him it wasn't. His weathered face tightening with concern as he called out, "Hello, anyone there?" The only reply was silence, until a second cry came weaker, this time from somewhere below. Eli dismounted, grabbing his rifle just in case, and followed the echo through the narrow, twisting gorge until he reached the dry creek bed. What he saw there made him stop cold. Two enormous figures lay sprawled in the dust women, Apache by their clothing and markings, but impossibly large, easily 7 feet tall. Their long black hair was matted with dirt and blood, and their deerskin dresses were torn from battle. One was barely conscious, the other trying desperately to stay awake, her dark eyes burning with both fear and pride. Eli had heard tales of the Apache giants women of legendary strength, said to guard sacred valleys, but he'd never believed them until now. For a long moment he stood frozen, torn between fear and compassion, before the older one whispered hoarsely, "Help, my sister." That was enough. Eli dropped his rifle and knelt beside them. "Don't move, you're hurt bad," he said, his rough voice softening. He opened his canteen, lifting the younger sister's head and letting a trickle of water fall between her cracked lips. She coughed, gasping softly as life returned to her eyes. The older sister watched his every move, still wary, her breathing ragged. "I don't mean no harm," Eli murmured. "Just helping." The woman nodded faintly, surrendering to exhaustion. "We were attacked. White men," she said weakly, glancing toward the canyon ridge. Eli followed her gaze and saw faint hoofprints leading away, half buried in sand. Whoever did this was long gone. He worked quickly, cleaning their wounds with what little cloth he had and building a small fire to keep them warm. Night fell heavy over the desert, bringing with it the whispering wind and the distant cry of a coyote. The firelight painted their faces in soft gold, and Eli found himself studying them, not with fear, but with quiet wonder. Giants, yes, but not monsters. They were human in their pain, their trembling hands clutching each other like frightened children. Hours passed before sleep took them. Eli sat awake beside the fire, his rifle across his lap, watching the flames dance against the canyon walls. He couldn't shake the feeling that by saving them, he'd crossed into something ancient, sacred. When dawn finally broke, pale and cold, the sisters stirred. Their wounds were wrapped, their breathing steadier. The older one met his eyes and said softly, "You have done a great thing, rancher. Our people will know." Eli didn't understand what she meant, but as the wind swept through the canyon and carried her words away, a chill ran down his spine. He had no idea that his act of kindness had already set something far greater in motion, something that would change his life forever. The morning sun climbed slow and fierce over the canyon, burning away the cool breath of night as Eli Turner saddled his horse and looked back at the two sisters he had saved. The fire had died to ash, but the light in their eyes was stronger now. The elder, whose name he'd learned was Taya, stood tall despite her wounds. her broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the sand. Her sister Nahia was smaller, but carried the same quiet power. Eli offered them what little food he had: hard biscuits and dried meat tanned. Though they hesitated, as they ate, the desert around them stirred. Vultures circled high above, the whisper of distant drums echoing faintly through the cliffs. Eli turned sharply. "You hear that?" Taya nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "They come?" Eli asked, unease creeping into his voice. "Our people and our chief?" She looked at him then with eyes full of something he couldn't name: gratitude, maybe, but also warning. Before Eli could speak again, a sharp wind swept through the canyon, carrying with it the sound of hooves. Out of the dust, a line of riders emerged, silent, powerful, their faces painted in red and black war marks. At their head rode a massive figure draped in eagle feathers and bone ornaments, his gaze cold and ancient. The Apache chief. Eli instinctively stepped back, his hand twitching near his holster, but Taya raised a hand. "Do not move," she whispered. "If you reach for that gun, you die." The chief dismounted with slow, deliberate grace. His eyes moved from Taya to Eli, then to the wounded Nahia. For a moment, no one spoke. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Then Taya stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Apache, her voice firm but respectful. The chief listened, his expression carved in stone. When she finished, he turned his gaze on Eli. The weight of that stare was like the desert sun itself, heavy, merciless. Finally, he spoke in broken English. "You save my daughters." Eli blinked. Daughters. His heart thudded hard. The two giant women, his daughters. That meant the man standing before him wasn't just a chief. He was the chief, the guardian of an entire Apache nation feared across the frontier. "I just did what anyone would have done," Eli said quietly. The chief studied him, eyes narrowing. "No, not any man," he said. "Most would run. You stay. You help." He took a step closer, his shadow stretching over Eli like a dark wave. "That choice," he said slowly, "has a price." The air grew tense. The Apache warriors shifted their horses, watching every twitch of Eli's hand. He stood his ground, dust swirling around his boots. "If there's a debt," he said, "I'll pay it." The chief's lips curved into something between a smile and a frown. "You will, but not with silver." With spirit, he lifted a carved staff and pointed it toward the horizon. "Tonight, you come to our camp. You eat with us. The great spirits will decide what you have earned." Eli wanted to refuse, but one look at Taya told him he couldn't. Her gaze was calm, but from it wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. As the Apache warriors turned their horses and rode back into the desert, Eli felt the ground beneath him tremble with the rhythm of their departure. When the last rider disappeared into the glare of the sun, he exhaled slowly. He had saved 2 lives, but in doing so, he had stepped into a world he didn't understand, a world of spirits, secrets, and sacred debts that could not be measured in coin. That night, under a sky full of stars and firelight, Eli Turner would learn that the Old West held more than outlaws and dust. It held powers as old as the land itself. By the time the sun sank behind the distant mesas, Eli Turner found himself riding deep into Apache territory, guided by the 2 sisters he had saved. The land had changed. The air felt heavier, charged with something ancient and unseen. The path wound through narrow canyons where strange symbols were carved into the walls, spirals, animals, and figures of giants with outstretched hands. Fires flickered in the distance, and the rhythmic beat of drums carried across the desert night like the slow pulse of the earth itself. When they finally reached the camp, Eli's breath caught. Dozens of teepees circled a great central fire, around which men, women, and children moved like shadows painted in flame. Every eye turned to him as he entered, a stranger among warriors. Taya and Nahia dismounted and walked ahead, their presence commanding quiet respect. As Eli followed, whispers rippled through the crowd, some curious, others hostile. He could feel their stares pierce through his dust-covered clothes and sunburned skin, marking him as the outsider he was. The chief appeared once more, standing by the great fire, his eagle feathers glowing orange in the blaze. He gestured for Eli to sit, and though his heart pounded, Eli obeyed. The drums slowed, the fire crackled, and silence settled like a heavy cloak. Then the chief spoke in a voice that carried through the still air. "The spirits have seen what you did. You saved blood of my blood. For that you have honor. But the desert never gives without taking." He motioned to an old woman beside him, her face wrinkled like dry riverbeds, her eyes pale as smoke. She was the tribe's shaman. She stepped forward, holding a bowl of burning sage, and began to chant in a low, melodic voice. The smoke curled around Eli, thick and sweet, making his head swim. The world seemed to sway. The firelight shimmered, and suddenly the camp around him began to fade into something else. He saw Vision's giant women standing atop cliffs, watching over rivers of gold and blood. Men in cowboy hats and soldiers in blue uniforms fighting under the same burning sun. And behind them all, a shadow, vast and ancient, moving beneath the desert like a sleeping god. The shaman's voice grew louder, blending with the drums, until Eli could feel the rhythm in his chest like a second heartbeat. "You walk between two worlds now," she whispered, her voice both near and far. "The land has chosen you, rancher. Your path is no longer your own." The vision broke. The smoke thinned. Eli found himself back at the fire, drenched in sweat. The chief watched him closely. "You see?" he asked. Eli tried to speak, but his throat was dry. I saw something," he managed. "The giants, the land, it was alive." The chief nodded slowly. "The Great Spirit speaks through the fire. You are marked now. What happens next will test your heart." He turned to Taya. "You and your sister will guide him. Tomorrow he rides to the sacred mesa." Taya bowed her head, then met Eli's eyes with quiet resolve. "You saved us," she said softly. "Now we save you." Confused, exhausted, and filled with an uneasy sense of destiny, Eli looked into the flames once more. They flickered and danced like eyes watching him from another world. He had come to the desert as a poor rancher with nothing left to lose. But now something vast and ancient had claimed him, and the true journey was only beginning. Dawn came slow and blood-red over the desert, spilling light across the camp like the opening of an old wound. Eli Turner stood beside his horse, tightening the reins with hands that still trembled from the visions of the night before. The air was cool, but the weight in his chest felt heavier than the heat of noon. Taya and Nehaya waited nearby, silent and solemn, their eyes fixed on the horizon where the great mesa rose like a sleeping giant from the sand. Its flat top glowed faintly in the morning light, sacred and unreachable. The chief said, "The spirits wait for you there," Taya told him quietly. "They will test your heart, your courage, your truth." Eli tried to smile, but it came out thin and nervous. "I'm no hero, Taya, just a rancher who made a dumb decision to follow a cry in the dark." Nehea tilted her head, her voice calm but strong. "Sometimes the spirits find the ones who don't believe in them. They like surprises." That made Eli chuckle despite himself. Then the three of them mounted their horses and rode into the rising sun. The journey was long and brutal. The desert stretched endless, shimmering under the heat, alive with whispers of wind and the call of unseen birds. Hours passed in silence except for the rhythmic thud of hooves on cracked earth. At one point, Eli noticed ancient carvings on the rock's giant footprints etched deep into the stone, half buried by sand. "The old ones walked here," Nehea said softly. "Long before white men came, before the rivers dried. They were our protectors, our sisters of the earth." Eli nodded slowly, feeling something stir inside him, a strange mix of awe and fear. As noon approached, the heat became unbearable. Sweat dripped down his neck, and his lips cracked from thirst. Yet the sisters rode on effortlessly, their strength almost otherworldly. Finally, by late afternoon, they reached the base of the mesa. It rose hundreds of feet into the sky, its sides sheer and unforgiving. Taya dismounted, tying her horse to a rock. "This is where we stop," she said. "You climb alone." Eli frowned, glancing up at the impossible height. "You serious?" "The test is not for us," she replied. "Only you can face what waits above." He took a deep breath, adjusted his hat, and began to climb. The rocks were hot under his hands, the wind sharp as blades. Halfway up, his strength faltered, and he nearly lost his grip. But something, maybe the echo of the drums he'd heard in the night, pushed him forward. When he finally reached the top, the world seemed to go silent. No wind, no sound, just the endless desert stretching in every direction, painted gold by the dying sun. In the center of the flat mesa stood a single stone pillar, ancient and covered in the same strange symbols he'd seen in the canyon. He approached slowly, feeling a chill crawl down his spine despite the heat. Then the air shimmered. From the dust rose a figure, a giant woman formed of smoke and light, her eyes glowing like embers. "Eli Turner," she said, her voice echoing through his bones. "You walk where no mortal has walked in many moons. You saved my daughters, and so the land spares you. But your heart carries a storm. To heal the earth, you must face it." Eli fell to his knees, speechless, the spirit's glow surrounding him like fire. The sky darkened, thunder rolled in the distance, and the test had begun. The desert wind rose suddenly, swirling around the top of the mesa like a living thing as Eli Turner stood trembling before the glowing figure of the spirit woman. Her eyes burned with ancient fire, her voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "The heart of man and the heart of the land are one," she said. "When man forgets the land forgets him." Her words sank into him like stones in deep water. Eli didn't fully understand, but he felt them deep, primal, older than any Bible verse or frontier tale he'd ever heard. The Spirit lifted her hand, and the ground beneath him began to shift. In an instant, the mesa vanished, and Eli was standing in the middle of a storm. The desert had turned black, lightning tearing the sky apart as walls of sand roared around him. Shapes moved in the storm faces, men on horseback, soldiers firing rifles, flames devouring wagons. He saw the past unfold like a nightmare, the settlers, the Apache wars, blood spilling into the dust. He saw men like himself, ranchers, miners, soldiers, taking land, burning villages, chasing ghosts of gold. "Do you see?" the Spirit thundered. "This is the price of forgetting." Eli fell to his knees, covering his face against the wind. "I didn't do this," he shouted, though his voice was swallowed by the storm. The Spirit appeared before him again, towering above the chaos. "You carry their legacy," she said. "You live on stolen breath, walk on borrowed bones. Yet you showed mercy when others would have turned away." The storm slowed. The sand began to clear, revealing not a battlefield, but a mirror of rippling light. When Eli looked into it, he saw himself not as he was, but as he had been. A broken man, angry at the world, blaming fate for his loss. He saw his ranch burning in a drought, his wife's grave marked by a simple wooden cross, his faith shattered. "You saved the sisters not out of courage," the Spirit whispered, "but because you no longer feared death." Eli's eyes burned. He wanted to look away, but the vision held him captive. "Then tell me," he rasped, "what am I supposed to do?" The Spirit's expression softened. "Remember," she said. "Remember that the land is alive, and your hands are part of it. The giants are not gods, they are its guardians. You will be their bridge." Slowly, she reached out, her massive, glowing palm hovering before him. "Take the oath, Eli Turner, and the spirits will walk with you." His hand shook as he raised it, touching her light. The moment their hands met, a surge of warmth and power rushed through him, flooding his veins with light. The world exploded in color visions of rivers returning, grasslands reborn, bison thundering across the plains. Then everything went dark. When Eli opened his eyes, he was lying on the mesa once more, the sun setting behind the distant hills. The Spirit was gone. His chest glowed faintly where her hand had touched him, a mark of light pulsing like a heartbeat. Far below, he could see Taya and Nahia waiting, their faces upturned. Somehow, he knew they could feel the change in the wind, the desert breathing again. Eli stood slowly, gripping his hat against the breeze. He didn't know what the oath truly meant, only that something sacred had passed into him. The test was over, but his purpose was only beginning.